I'm here online with my good friend Bill Russo of Automobility. Bill is one of the leading experts on the mobility sector in the world. He's based in Shanghai but travels a lot. And he definitely has a lot of points of view with respect to the sector and where we're headed. We have a panel that we're planning for the workshop on the headwinds to the EVs adoption in the US and in the West generally. We're going to get into that a little here today, but just with some overview discussion. And then this will be a lead into that panel. Bill obviously has a point of view. There are others in the panel that have different points of view. So I'm not going to try to tip the scales here by letting Bill argue his case too strongly today, but try to give an overview. And then we'll get into it more in Santa Cruz. So Bill, say hello to everybody and maybe give a little bit of background on yourself.
Hey, Howard, looking forward to the event in a couple of weeks. Should be fun. Yeah, long time in China, 20 plus years now. Came over with Chrysler, now running my own business called Automobility. Uh, Been in the auto and tech world for 4 decades now, and excited by what I'm seeing. I'm also a little bit troubled by what I'm seeing in terms of the way it's being viewed as a political tool, as a football. But it is a challenge. I think we're all facing in this industry a challenge of how do we upgrade, how do we innovate, how do we bring technology to scale. And yeah, it's been a great couple of decades of watching China, which is acting as a catalyst for the scaling of the next generation of automotive technology.
Okay. So first of all, Bill's been a regular at our events in Bonny, Doon, Santa Cruz, and comes every 6 months. So he spoke most recently in our spring event. But this is a sector that changes and develops and morphs very, very quickly. So maybe, Bill, you can just give us a quick update as to where things have happened, what has happened in the last, say, 6 months with respect to the EV and mobility sector in terms of geopolitically, market-wise, and otherwise.
Yeah, well, 6 months is a snapshot in time, but a lot has changed. I'd say the most notable thing is in this year, Chinese companies are going to take 60 so far this year, 64% of passenger vehicles sold in China are locally branded. Uh, in 2020, to give it easy to remember, the same number, 64%, was held by foreign brands in China. So in just the span of a little over 3.5 years, we've completely turned the dominance of the industry upside down in China. The local brands have the competitive edge over the foreign brands for retail consumer purchase vehicles, and that's largely because of electrification. The Chinese companies went faster than the multinationals to the EV future. BYD surpassed within the last 6 months, actually 3 months ago. Volkswagen is the top selling brand in China. It is the number one company with 34%, 35% actually of the market for this year in China. It's a race to the future. And right now, I think from a technology standpoint, the edge you got to say, at least in China, is to the local brands.
And also, my perception, Bill, is that there's been an acceleration of the globalization of Chinese companies. Chinese have been going global, outbound. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the progress that Chinese car companies have been making outside of China. Obviously, our event is mostly about the U.S. and about the West, but China is such the elephant in the room that we can't ignore this.
Well, here's yeah, absolutely. And let's dimension the size of that elephant. In 2023, China made 32% of all the vehicles made in the world. 29% of those vehicles sold in the world were sold in China. So it is by far the most dominant. The number two country in terms of automotive production is the United States with 11%. So China is about a market for production that is 3 times larger than the US. Um, and if you're talking about electric vehicles, they actually make 64% of the world's electric vehicles. So 2 out of every 3 EVs made in the world are made in China. So it's such a big impact on the automotive industry, surely because of its size and scale. In 2023, China sold more vehicles, exported made in China vehicles outside to the rest of the world than any other nation. It surpassed Japan with 4.9 million vehicles exported. That continues into this year. Exports from China will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 6.5 million units this year. So it's not a lead that they just got and will hold on to for a short period of time. It's a widening lead. Now, here's the thing that I think most people would find fascinating is 78% of the EVs, or sorry, it's like EVs, 78% of the cars made in China this year are that were exported powered by an internal combustion engine. So if we kind of think of the story of China's rise as an automotive powerhouse of global relevancy, we tend to think of it only based on its challenge in the next generation of automotive technology, mainly electric vehicles. But the reality is China's going global with a whole lot of gasoline-powered vehicles in the export mix. And the reason for that is China as a country isn't buying the combustion engine configurations as much as they had in the past. So they have to turn that gun and aim it at other targets. And going global obviously is a way to do that.
So Bill, so let's turn now to the international picture. It's been reported in the press that there's been a slowdown in investment in EV production by some of the major OEMs across the world, as well as perhaps a slowing of adoption and purchasing by the consumer. What actually is happening in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think this is an example of if you create the PR spin and you kind of reinforce what you believe to be true, and it then turns into some element of the truth. The fact is, the EV market has continued to rise. In China, it continues to rise exponentially. China's exports, as I think I mentioned earlier, heavily skewed to ICEs because the rest of the world is not at the same place in terms of market acceptance, retail market acceptance. And part of that is because of the lack of scale and lack of infrastructure, lack of scale of supply, which makes EVs affordable, lack of infrastructure, what makes them convenient to use. And I think that's the main reason for consumer reluctance, if there is reluctance. But the facts are that the market globally has continued to grow, only at a slower pace than what we've seen here. What really the key has been to the retail consumer acceptance of the EV, which, by the way, took off after Tesla's entry into the market in China. So it was a retail consumer interest was triggered by a foreign brand, and the beneficiaries of which have been the local brands who could make EVs affordable because of scale, because of battery supply chain, which China dominates even more than the EV product itself. More than 70% of the EV batteries in the world are made in China. So the lack of retail acceptance has been largely because of affordability, I believe. Something that China has cracked, right? The ability to scale and make EVs affordable. Something the rest of the world has not, for reasons that I think are a bit of a mix between not having the capability, the supply chain in particular capability, and really not having the infrastructure that I've seen installed here over the last decade for making EVs more convenient to use. So the facts are, I think the market acceptance would be much higher globally if we had globally scaled supply chains for these types of products.
Right.
But that's, I think, the function of the geopolitical environment that we're in.
Right. And then another consequence of this environment is, as we all know, is a lot of new tariffs, protectionism, both in the US and then also now in Europe. The US and Europe seem to be taking somewhat different approaches to this set of issues. Maybe you can just preview briefly how you think this is going to end up. I mean, obviously the US has already imposed tariffs, and then there's more tariffs, especially if Donald Trump is elected. Europe is in the middle of in the process of imposing new tariffs potentially, or at least negotiating the terms
Right.
of those new tariffs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you think we're going to end up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, I think the speed at which, and again, if I look at the challenge that China represents, we should be up for a challenge, right? If we've prepared for the event, then we should be ready for the race to the future. But I think when you realize that your competitor has beaten you, and I mean, just look at what Jim Farley has said about his experience of coming to China and realizing that they're ahead of us now. And that was a quote that he made after experiencing the Chinese products. He's told his team he took a Xiaomi SU7 product and he doesn't want to give it back because he's enjoying it so much. Now he's obviously signaling to his people we better be able to compete with China. And I think that's what we all ought to be motivated to do. But tariffs are designed to prevent that competition or at least slow it down significantly. And there's a dramatic difference between what the US has done. And the intentions are always, give my home team a shot at competing. And if you've been beaten, or if you're dealing with somebody with superior technology or competitiveness, then you're going to resort to tariffs as a way of leveling the playing field, which I think is what both Europe and the US is trying to do. But there's a vast difference between what the US did, which was basically put up a stop sign and say, no, China, we're going to do 100% tariffs, and we're not even going to talk about it, versus what the EU did, which says we're going to create a graded system. So you're all going to get different grades depending on a certain set of factors. They said the factors were based on how much they complied with the EU anti-subsidy investigation. But the fact is the tariff levels are different for different companies. Tesla gets a much lower tariff. BYD gets the second rung of the ladder up from Tesla. Geely gets the third rung up. And then a bunch of companies get the fourth and fifth. Basically what Europe is doing is they're saying, let's negotiate. And they didn't implement them immediately the way the US did. Europe said, well, we have room to negotiate this between now and the end of the year. They're due to go in effect this week. And they've been talking. So there's conversation going on as to what the actual end tariff would be. Again, lower for the companies that have made more commitments to invest in Europe. So what Europe is trying to do is encourage a bit of horse trading, if you will. Let's make sure we get what we need from the company before we allow them to come in and take some of the market. It's a recognition that I think pragmatically the competitiveness of the European automotive companies in large part depend on their ability to access China and access the Chinese supply chain. And I think that's probably a more pragmatic way to deal with the geopolitical issue and, frankly, the competitive challenge that China represents to the automotive industry.
Right. Well, that's a great summary. Bill, you served up a tremendously a great appetizer for our event next month. I think we should stop it here so that we don't give away all the content for November 12th. I look forward to seeing you in Santa Cruz and Bonny Doon, and we'll have a great conversation. Thank you so much for today.